I think we're live. So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the quarterfinals of the Devon Winter Grand Prix. I'm Tom Thorpe, no co commentator with me this evening, as my usual co commentators playing in one of the quarterfinals. We've got two really exciting matches coming up for you this evening, which we'll preview and watch in just a couple of minutes' time. But first, I just wanted to say tonight we've got the two matches in the open section, with Jack Rudd and John Underwood already qualified for the semi-finals. Jack finishing in first, John finishing in second. And then these players, four players we see tonight, finished third through sixth in the Grand Prix. Hopefully we start getting some people joining us in the streaming and getting ready to watch the matches. It's been a little bit of time since we've last streamed, so apologies if I'm a little bit rusty. But let's get underway. The semi-finals for the graded section will also be next Friday, along with the semi-finals, the open section, but let's see who will qualify. Let's do a little preview then of the two quarterfinals coming up for us this evening. Tim Paulden against Tristram De Piro. Tim Paulden finishing in third place in the Grand Prix, and Tristram finishing in sixth. Newcomer to the finals stage of the Grand Prix. We're just waiting for them to get underway at the moment. And Paul Hapton finished fourth. David Holmes finished in fifth. David, of course, normally plays in the graded section, but qualified in fifth overall and decided to play in the open section. So looking forward to seeing how he does at the top level. If we're asking for a couple of predictions, which I had a couple of emails about before starting, with Paul against David, I think Paul's probably going to take it 3-1. I think, David is a very strong player, very aggressive player. But Paul, I think, just has the experience and has finished second and third in the Grand Prix, plays in all of the Mondays and Fridays, or plays in a lot of them. So I think it's going to be a very tough ask for David this evening. And the other match, Tim Paulden against Tristram, very much unknown. Tristram, a player who has played in all the Grand Prix previously and hasn't qualified, but has beaten Jack, has beaten John, has beaten Tim, has beaten all of us pretty much. It's going to be very interesting to see which Tristram comes up this evening. And Tim's definitely got to be very nervous, I think. I think Tim will take it. I think it'll be close. I think it might even go to 2 all tie breaks. I sort of hope so because we've not had a tie break yet. Quick roundup of the format as we wait for the 4 players to get underway, which is starting in a couple of minutes. So the format, they will be playing 2 games of 9+3, which is our usual Monday night format, followed by 2 games of 5+2. And if that's tied, they'll continue playing 5+2 games until we get a winner. So we could be here all night. So far, that's not happened, but it would be my luck if that happened this evening whilst I'm on my own. If you've got any questions or queries throughout the evening, please do put them in the chat. I'll try and get to them as best as I can, although my attention will mostly be on the games. As I say that, David Holmes and Paul Hampton have begun their first game, or at least they've set up the match, so we'll be waiting for them to get underway in just a couple of minutes. We'll probably see Paul playing the Birds opening as he normally does. It'll be interesting to see how David responds to this, because I don't think we've seen this in the graded sections or the mini Swiss last time around. And we've got a From's Gambit. Maybe this sets a tone for the match coming up. The idea here is if you take, black's going to push the pawn to d6 and try and get the bishop developed quickly in return for the pawn. Paul, as white, will have played against this many times, and I'm sure David has been looking at this, maybe preparing it, or even just plays this normally. Be prepared for some crazy lines. I was about to say with moves like g5 to try and kick this knight, to try and get this queen checkmate down here. It is a pretty bonkers opening. Definitely play it with caution. But it'll be interesting to see how this one comes out. As you can see, the rating difference on chess.com, not that means huge amounts, especially in quicker chess, but Paul with a significantly higher rating, but that doesn't mean to say that David hasn't got a chance at all, because we've seen how aggressive he can play in his previous games, and he's done very well to qualify in 5th place in the overall Grand Prix. So the first time we're actually streaming the quarterfinals. Normally we just stream the semi-finals and finals, but that's only because I was playing in the previous two quarterfinals, but didn't play in the Grand Prix this time around. So you're stuck with me for another week, I'm afraid. Still waiting on the other match to get underway, the match between Tim Paulden and Tristram De Piro. So we'll stick on this game for now. I have absolutely no idea if this is theory. Given how quickly Paul is playing, I'm assuming he's looked at this and knows this. And knows this very well. Good evening to everyone in the chat. Ocelot, Babs, John, good to see you all. Yes, John saying that the From's Gambit against Paul's probably not the wisest idea. It's if you're an underdog in a match, I can understand why you want to play a Gambit, and I think it's fair to say that David's probably an underdog coming into this. But yeah, Paul is going to know this very, very well, having had to face it many, many times. Going to be interesting to see what happens, though. One thing we've noted is, of course, I think we'll notice this in the other match in particular, but especially in this match, is the time. Paul generally, I think, a bit of a faster player than David. Will be interesting to see what happens on the time situation. Could that be a crucial factor? I think the other match, we're still waiting for that to get underway. I think Tim may be having a couple of internet issues. He's just logged out of chess.com, so I'm not sure if he's having any difficulties. Yeah, he's just come back online. But in that other match, I think time is going to be a very, very crucial factor. When that starts, we'll get onto it. So let's have a look at this position in a bit more detail rather than me just babbling on about the players. So white is a pawn up. Black has sacrificed his pawn in exchange for this extra development, but the king side very exposed, so black probably going to want to castle queen side. But it's kind of difficult to know where to put this bishop. You couldn't really put the bishop on f5. The pawn would just go to e4, and then it would have to move away, and white gets exactly what they want. So playing bishop e6 makes a lot of sense. Now if white goes something like e4, that's going to be threatening the move d5. So actually, you know, is this bishop going to be a little bit unstable here? And bishop g2 played instead, also threatening d5, of course. In fact, there's a question. Why couldn't we go d5 straight away? Because of knight e5, of course, which would be hitting the queen. So if you go d5, knight to e5 here, then you can move the queen over to b5 with check, but then the bishop's going to drop back and block that. Tim is just having a couple of issues. He's not able to issue the challenge, so hopefully he'll be able to sort that out in due course. Hopefully between the two of them they'll be able to sort that out. As far as I know, chess.com aren't having any issues, but we'll have to see. But bishop g2 has been played instead. And now we await for black to make their move. I'm just going to quickly message Tim, who is just logged off again, so I can't do that. Hopefully they'll be able to sort that out soon. Yeah, it does look like the centre's going to potentially get a bit rolled for black here. White having these two central pawns, if white's able to get those rolling, gain a lot of space in the centre, it's just going to give white a lot of freedom to be able to develop their pieces without too much worry. Plus the fact, of course, white is a pawn up in this position because black has sacrificed it early in the opening. So what has black got in return for that? Well, he's got development. He's going to castle queenside, but honestly, yes, he's got the development, but white has fairly safe developments. Even though white is perhaps 1 or 2 tempi down, it's not as scary, I would say. It's not as threatening to black's position. You know, move like knight d2, knight e4, or c4 seems very natural. I'm not sure where this bishop wants to go on c1. Probably is happy just to sit on d2 for the moment to get white castled on the queen side. White really doesn't want to castle on the king side. This open rook on the h-file will be pretty dangerous. And yeah, it's tricky to know what a good plan is for black here. If you castle queenside, the knight's just going to jump to e4 or c4. I'm not entirely sure which is best. And, you know, white even has ideas that if black castles queenside of taking on c6, breaking up this structure, and then, you know, giving a check on a6 straight away perhaps doesn't do a lot, but certainly would give black some problems on the queen side. Still having a few difficulties on the other match, so we'll hang on for that in just a moment. I'm conscious that I don't want to reply to Tim's Skype message because I'm using Skype for the camera on the stream. F5 here, an interesting move. Trying to control some of the central squares in the middle to try and perhaps deny white playing pawn to e4. Also stops the knight jumping into e4, which would have had good control over these dark squares if you could put a bishop on g5, let's say. So f5 stops that happening. Now it feels like you might want to go knight c4. Maybe even a playing move like a4 to stop the knight ever being kicked with b5, although that's not a threat with the bishop coming forwards. And welcome Jack in the chat. From's Gambit. Yep. I think we're going to see some very aggressive openings between these two players this evening. And perhaps a little bit more cautious in the other match once that gets underway. So I'm just going to quickly risk opening up Skype and seeing if I can reply to Tim's message. I am still... That's not worked. Doesn't look like I can do that, which is a shame. So hopefully maybe I'll be able to reply on my phone. We'll see if that works. And if not, then unfortunately I'll just have to work that out. Apologies for the slight delay. This is the slight problem with having to keep an eye on how the game is also going. So pawn to b3. Is that just trying to prepare knight c4? So if you go knight c4 in this position, am I forgetting something? Ah, yes, I am forgetting. I'm forgetting this bishop takes g3, which I think I just saw on the chat. Yes, absolutely, yeah. So if you played knight c4 straight away, that's a good point. You would take twice on c4, the queen would be on the red square here, and then you could play bishop takes g3 check, and this pawn is pinned, although it's not, because the bishop defends the rook, so perhaps that would be a case of if you played bishop takes c6. Yes, I'm getting a little bit distracted by everything else, I'm afraid. So Jack can correct everybody in the chat and me. Thanks, Jack. I'll leave you to do all the chess commentary. I'll just sort out the technical issues. b3, and then the bishop has dropped back to d7. I'm not. I'm guessing that's just in defense of this idea of you know, trying to stop bishop takes c6. At the moment, it's defending h1, so this would not be a threat. But now, if you go bishop d7, if you take, you're going to take with the bishop there, and that's going to give some chances. I'm not sure why chess.com isn't automatically updating the moves, so I'll just try and quickly skip through and hopefully it'll do that. Knight c4, castle's queenside, now knight takes d6, and now what happens if we go queen takes d6, which feels like the natural move. You don't want to be isolating this pawn here. What's white's idea here? I think you're right, Jack, in that black does want bishop takes c6. I think you're right, although black's probably worried about the king's safety on the queen side, albeit once you've sacrificed a pawn in the opening, perhaps you're not so worried about your king's safety. This position, though, white is a pawn up, and it seems very comfortable. White can just play bishop f4 here, attack the queen. The queen's going to move away, and white's fully developed. You know, can choose which side to castle on, probably queen side, given the open h file. And yeah, I think just with the extra pawn, white has got a very decent position here. does look like the other match is still having a little bit of difficulty getting underway. So I'm just going to try and get into a chat with the two players. So hopefully they'll be able to sort that out. Could be a slightly longer evening for us this evening if this match gets underway a little bit later on. Not a problem, of course. Just means I won't be going to bed very early. Never mind. Queen to e3 then, just offering the trade of queens. White is a pawn up. So, of course, black shouldn't want to trade this out. But the problem is you move the queen away to somewhere like f7 and black's just got really good control of the dark squares. The two bishops doing a very, very nice job. And yeah, this looks like a very, very nice position for white. This knight on c6, I'm trying to think the best way to get that into the game. Maybe now you can look with the queen on a3 of knight a5, knight b3, queen c1 completely stomps out where that is. Black going back to e7, perhaps offering the repetition. Not sure that's going to be taken by white here. You can just play bishop g5, and that's going to be an exchange to white here as well as the extra pawn. So looking like it's going to be a white win in this first game. The time situation as well. Paul with 5.5 minutes. David only with 1.5 minutes, and the material down. Going to be a very tricky escape here. And Paul looks like he's going to take a 1-0 lead in this match. But does that mean a lot going forwards? Well, it certainly helps to get the first win on the board. But of course, a long, long way to go with 3 more games. Not sure there's huge amounts more to say in this. Rook takes h2. Well, that's one way to try and confuse matters. Of course, if you play rook takes h2, queen takes g3 check here happens, and then you pick back up the rook. I think the issue is here, though, isn't it, that you can take on h2, but then the queen would be hitting g2 once the queen has recaptured the rook on h2. So perhaps, because the bishop is covering h1, can you get away with something like bishop h4? That seems really artificial. Maybe you don't worry about this. Maybe you just let this bishop drop. It does feel like you can try and find a way here to actually win the bishop. Paul's just deciding to keep things fairly straightforward here. Checks king f1. Of course, now that's defending the bishop on g2. This is going to be a long evening if I'm missing things like that. So after you take on h2, this bishop can now run away, and now white is a full rook up. Sorry, a rook for a pawn up, and well, I don't think this g pawn's going to be hugely threatening on its own here. This bishop on g2 doing a good square of controlling, stopping that checkmate on f2, so just good defense, blocking h1 as well. So if black plays a move like pawn to g3, white can play a move like queen f4 or something. Queen f4, queen h4 comes to mind to try and trade the queens. I'm not sure we want to be playing bishop takes knight here. That feels like possibly the wrong idea, only because then after bishop takes c6, suddenly the king on the king's side is going to be under a lot of pressure. I think just a simple move. This bishop's really good at defending. Something like this feels like quite a good idea. Yeah, there we go. And yeah, a whole rook up. It's going to be tricky, I think, to get out of this one. Knight d8, and yeah, now queen h4 forces the trade of queens, and that should be enough to win the first game, I would think, with the extra rook. Queen h4, of course, threatening to take on d8. Got the bishop and the queen there attacking that, so black would be forced to take on h4 there. Also, even if black leaves the queen there, moves the knight, you can play queen takes h2, pawn takes, and the bishop covers the queening square, so we wouldn't be having an issue there as well. I'm not sure what happened there with my chat there with the two players, but there we are. Hopefully they'll be able to sort that out within the next 20 minutes or so, just to get that underway. It looks like there's an issue on the chess.com side that they're just trying to resolve. Yeah, it looks like there's a thing saying one of the players is unavailable, so looks like we'll have to wait a little bit longer for that match to start. But for now, we can keep an eye on this match. Now bishop takes knight, bishop f3, just to block that off, albeit this pawn might start rolling forwards. Doesn't really matter, I don't think. Just thinking how you can get the rook into the game. This is a nice move, e3, just to try and break up the structure. Now you can play, after takes, king e2 perhaps. And if bishop g4 check, just play bishop f3, block that off, and then eventually your extra rook is going to win the game. I think this is good technique here from Paul. Just kept things nice and simple. David did a good job there of trying to keep things complicated with a move like rook takes h2. Didn't work out this time, although quite a common idea in the From's gambit. That idea of taking on h2 and taking on g3. But Paul managed to negotiate the complications and has been able to come out a rook up in this endgame. This f-pawn now going to drop. Bishop g4 check, and now you can even play probably king d2, and even f3 is going to drop, so that's good. King to d2, of course, doesn't allow any bishop f5 check. Not hugely necessary, but perfectly fine. And that's all she wrote in the first game. So 1-0 to Paul Hampton before the other match even begins. And they're off and running. A good start for Paul there with the white pieces. David will have the white pieces in this second game coming up. They're playing 2 games of 9+3, followed by 2 games of 5+2. And it looks like we're going to get a Sicilian coming in, a Smith-Morra gambit. It's just going to be gambits all the way, I think, throughout this match. And Paul declining that. Interesting, this c4 move. I don't think I've seen this before. After d3, it's possibly theory, but I'm unsure. And it looks like the other match is underway, so I shall jump over to Tim Paulden against Tristram. So they have begun at long last. Excellent news that they've been able to sort out those problems, and we start out with a Scandinavian defense. So I'll finally preview this match. It's taken me a little bit of time to get round to it. Not sure White is particularly that ahead in the Scandinavian. Thanks, chess.com. His evaluation. Let's ignore that for the moment. So Tim Paulden, the guy who runs the show pretty much for the online club and has been involved in the 2 semi-finals previous to this in the Grand Prix, does an excellent job. And, he'll be the favourite coming into this match, but Tristram, very much a wild card, has beaten pretty much all of us in the Grand Prix, including Jack, a number of times. Very, very dangerous player. One of the things that I've noticed throughout his games is that he can play really, really well. And then, sometimes the time trouble can get to him. So, in time trouble, things can go a bit awry. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the time impacts this match. Tim, of course, is notorious for sometimes getting into time trouble. Although I have noticed in online games he's managed to speed up. So it's going to be interesting to see how his approach to this match is going to be. Certainly noticed he's tried to speed up over the last couple of weeks in the main games in the Grand Prix. So it's going to be interesting to see if he brings that into this match. Certainly looks like it from the opening here. Oh, I'm very pleased that this match has got underway. I was getting very nervous then. A bit worried that it wasn't going to get started. Again, Looking at the chess.com ratings, you can see Tim's quite a bit higher than Tristram's, but again, doesn't mean a huge amount. These players in matches will almost certainly have done some preparation and some work. They may not have done, but I imagine Tim has coming into this match. Looks like a fairly standard Scandinavian position. This Queen d8 variation is a very modest approach to it, perfectly reasonable. Other usual moves are Queen a5 to somewhat put pressure on this diagonal, and also Queen d6 is another fairly popular move, but I know Tim has taken up the Queen d8 line fairly recently. And the idea here is you effectively play, as Tim has, playing c6, playing e6, knight d7, almost getting a sort of a Caro-Kann type setup. Very, very solid, very hard to break down. Black, of course, has spent a couple of tempi, a bit of time to take on d5 and then return the queen back to its home on d8. So White, on the other hand, has got good development. Excuse me there. So White has got good development in return for this. It was already castled, got two of their minor pieces out, got the queen on a good square on f3. Black has got a solid position. Personally, I prefer White here. I think I like the space advantage, this extra d-pawn, this d-pawn rather in the centre. It's not extra. Just controlling the squares in the centre of the board. Just doing a good job of restricting Black to the third rank. And fairly easy development, albeit this bishop doesn't have a fantastic square, mostly because of these pawns on c6 and e6, controlling a lot of light squares. Bishop d6 here, so trying to trade off this bishop here, this bishop on f4, definitely a slightly more dangerous piece. This bishop on d6, is a good piece, but I think Black is generally wanting to keep the knights on the board. Knight d7, and then trying to break through in the center with either e5 or c5. As Jack says in the chat, it looks like good development. Not sure it actually is. It's one of those, isn't it? You get the pieces out, and then it's where do they go from there? It's kind of like the Alekhine's defense, which is e4 followed by knight f6, and then this knight gets chased around the board, and White gains a lot of time by doing that, but it doesn't quite give White an absolute cutting edge position. And in fact, you get your pieces out, and then Black is still so solid that that you can't really do anything with it. Bishop g5 here, putting some pressure on this f6 knight, albeit I don't think Black minds taking back with the g pawn. But Black's probably going to play knight d7 anyway to just guard that knight, allow this queen to come out to say a5 at the right moment. And Black has an interesting decision of where to place his king here. Does he want to go on the king side or the queen side? I think both are perfectly fine. I think with White committing to the queen side fairly early, there's a potential that Black will want to castle king side and actually start launching these pawns forwards, try and get a pawn storm, albeit I'm not sure how effective that is in attacking in this type of position. It seems a little bit slow, plus the queen on f3 does a good job of putting pressure over on the queen side to try and stop that plan. White, on the other hand, well, let's see, probably puts the bishop on d3. That feels like the most natural square, mostly to try and get the rook to e1, to get that rook into the game, the h rook, and to try and dissuade Black from playing a move like e5, which feels like a fairly natural breakout in these sorts of positions. Remember, this is the first game in this match between Tim and Tristram. They had a little bit of technical difficulties early on, but they have started now. And the other match between Paul Hampton and David Holmes, Paul Hampton is 1-0 up with David with the white pieces. And we will have a quick jump to that game now as we see White develop his bishop to c4 rather than d3, which feels perfectly reasonable as well. Given after b5, there's going to be some issues on c6 because of that queen on f3. Black developing on the queen side here. Going to be interested in how this one goes. We'll come back to it in a little bit. Let's have a look now at Paul Hampton against David Holmes. So Smith-Morra Gambit, as we saw, and we've almost transposed into some Maroxy Bind type position. I think this might even be a position you can reach in the English as well, or something similar. Anyway, both players playing fairly natural moves, putting the knight on c5, and then playing the move a5 to try and dissuade white from ever playing b4. Very standard Maroxy Bind position this here. So black gaining space on the queen's side, and black very happy to trade some pieces. And after bishop to e6, black is looking to trade sometimes this knight on d5. Certainly in some Maroxy Bind positions, you've already traded these two knights. The Maroxy Bind comes in a normal Sicilian, so the knight has come to d4 after the exchange of pawns. And then generally black has traded these knights off. So this extra set of pieces actually helps white. Generally when you've got less space, as black has in this position, these two pawns in the center doing a good job of giving white this space, you're happier to trade the pieces because it makes your position less cluttered. If you've got less space, you've got fewer squares to be able to maneuver your pieces in. So if you can trade off a couple of pairs of pieces, you're going to free up a couple of extra squares for, the remainder of your pieces to be able to move about in and get to good squares. So this knight on c5 is well placed. White will never really want to take this unless there's some good tactical reason. But black's got to come up with a good plan here to try and get something. This queen protecting b2. So this bishop doing a great job of, controlling a lot of the central squares, but not able to take anything straight away. And this queen is doing, it's doing a little bit of a dance, isn't it? From a5 back to d8 and then back out to a5. So this looks like this is offering the perpetual here. It's going to be interesting to see if Paul decides to take this option. He's definitely having a look in this position, whether he can play a move like queen a6 perhaps, and maybe put pressure on this diagonal. But it looks like Paul is settling for this position, and we get a draw. A very, I wouldn't say a tame game, but certainly a friendly game, let's say. But Paul with the first win. Happy to take a draw and take it to the quicker portion of the match where, perhaps he feels he also has an advantage. So that's a fairly friendly game. They'll probably take a little bit of time, just a little break at that match going 1.5-1/2. Let's jump now to Tim Paulden against Tristram De Piro, and looks like a lot has changed, so let's go back. Queen a5, oh dear, whoops. So after queen a5, that's hitting the bishop on g5 kind of subtly. Bishop b3, a fairly natural move, but unfortunately dropping the bishop on g5, and black then is a whole bishop up. White now going to be doing his absolute best to try and complicate things, trying to get some kingside attack. But black has been able to trade a pair of pieces and looks like he's going to take this one and take a 1-0 lead. It'll be interesting to see how the rest of the match goes after this one. But yeah, unfortunate blunder there on g5. I'm sure we've all fallen foul to that sort of trick with the queen being such a long-range piece, and sometimes you just miss that sort of move. So an unfortunate mistake there. But of course, Tristram not out of this game yet, but certainly going to be struggling. And g6, well, that's a move to really try and complicate things. I'm assuming if you went h takes, white was just going to go h5. White's going h5 anyway, just sacrificing, throwing the kitchen sink at black, going to be throwing the rook to g1, and if this is taken, queen takes, and just try and attack on the king's side. Absolutely the right idea. You know, if you're behind in a game, it doesn't matter if you go further behind in material. Just go for an attack, try and get a swindle. If you're a whole bishop down, you know Tim's going to be able to convert that if you don't do anything. So, you know, being proactive is absolutely the right strategy here. And yeah, this is definitely going to give Tim something to think about. And if we look at the times, Tim has only got 3.5 minutes. Should be enough time, but you know, food for thought. G5, I like this move. Trying to keep things as closed as possible. Don't open lines for these rooks. Excuse me. To not get these rooks coming in. So just keeping this nice and closed. And in fact, this pawn on h5 also gets in the way. You know, if this pawn's going to push to h6, Tim is just going to play g6 straight away and just keep that locked in. And then this rook on h1 is almost stuck behind its own pawn. And, you know, what's good about your opponent's pieces, you can take them, but you can't take your own pieces. And whilst that sounds a little bit silly, it does make a difference here, because now this rook on h1, whilst it defends a pawn, that's all it's doing. It's not going to be threatening anything immediately. Tim's probably going to watch out for something like rook takes g5 and then rook takes g6 and then pushing the pawn to h7. I don't think it does anything. The king's just going to hide in the corner. But, you know, definitely those are the tactics that that Tim's going to be watching out for with the black pieces. White's going to have to be thinking how to get this bishop out. Doesn't want to trade on d5, so probably plays a move like c4, or probably has to be c3 now. You know, play the bishops to c2, as Charlie is suggesting in the chat here, and then try and get a sacrifice on g6. It's the only way really to try and to throw even more pieces at the king. Shouldn't be enough. You would think that, you know, black's position is solid enough. Black can always, you know, drop a piece, you know, drop this queen back to e7 to cover the 7th rank. You know, play knight f6 to defend h7. You know, there should be enough resources here to defend. Jack suggesting black's attack is faster. I think he's probably right. Albeit I'm a fairly boring player when it comes to being material up. I'm not looking for the attack. I'm just looking to solidify. But I think Jack's right. Although I think, you know, if white plays very aggressively and just throws everything at white, then I think white will get an attack in quicker. Maybe not a sound one, but an attack nonetheless. Rook e8, well, that looks like that's just defending the e6 pawn, so it allows this queen to move, perhaps to f4 in this position. Looks like a fairly natural square. There we go, attacking f2. You know, slowly, I say slowly getting in. It's pretty quick, to be honest. This rook's under attack, so, you know, is white going to defend this and go for a sacrifice on g6? That feels like the right idea. Albeit if you defend the rook, queen takes f2 comes in, and then your attack is stifled. But if you play a move like rook g2, queen f3 comes in, and that's going to force the trade of queens there. Well, maybe not straight away. Rook g2, queen f3, you can play queen f1, but then you can play, I think you can play knight e3 in that position, because that f pawn is pinned, and that would be forking the g and the f rook. It's a bit of a long line, not normally a line I will look at on stream, but that feels like that's quite a nice combination to force either the trade of queens or win more of material. Possibly unnecessary, but let's see if Tim plays it. Queen f3 here, I think, is the move. Either the trade happens, or the queen drops back to f1, and then you can play the knight to e3, and that's going to fork both the f1 square and the g2 square. Let's see if that comes up in the game. Tim's doing a very good job here of just, you know, parrying this attack. There's never really been a sacrifice on g6 opportunity because black's been the one that's had the initiative. And in fact, black has got the exchange of queens there, Tristram deciding to accept that fate. And now I think you can even consider knight f4 here. Defends g6. Forces his rook on g2 to move. Looks like a very nice move. Knight f8. Very safe move. Just puts another defender on g6. Not taking any chances. And with the extra bishop, with the extra piece rather, it is looking slightly ominous for white here. Paul and David look like they're still taking a little bit of a break at the moment, which is all good. So we'll stick with this game for the moment to see how this first game comes up. Of course, they'll be starting their quicker games, 5+2, so we'll have to spend a little bit more time on them just to keep an eye on that match to make sure that we don't miss any of the action there in the second half of their match. Rook e7 here, that's just stopping any nonsense on the king side again. Good defending move. I think you can still play a move like knight f4. I think that's possibly a little bit more accurate, but these are all very sensible moves. And you'll also notice that Tim's putting all his pieces on dark squares. That may not be intentional. It's probably a little bit more to do with the fact that he's trying to overprotect this g6 square. And so they naturally go onto dark squares, but that's moving them away from any potential forks, pins, whatever from the bishop. So how is black going to finish the job off here? Black has got a very solid defense on the king side, but the rooks aren't actually going anywhere fast. So it's a question of how does black utilize this extra piece to his advantage. If you move this knight away, then the c6 pawn would drop. So black again just putting another defender on g6, and well, black has done a good job of blunting out any attack, but actually, how is he going to go about progressing here? Jack suggesting in the chat just moving the king all the way over to d6, albeit it's not letting me draw an arrow from one bit to another, which is a shame. But just moving the king all the way over, and this seems very reasonable to then break open the center. Tim looks like he's trying to find a different way, although this c6 pawn might be dropping, unless he wants to play a move like knight e7 to guard the c6 pawn. But it does feel like, well, quite a lot of pawns are being traded off. Now, that's going to favour white, if white can get to the very end of the game. But, this is still winning for black with the extra knight. But it does feel a little bit like that Tim's played this almost overly cautious. And yes, there are enough pawns to be able to still win the game with, because, of course, you want to use in the very end game, your extra piece to guide that pawn to the queening square. But, yeah, it definitely feels like something's gone a little bit astray, but this isn't the end of the world. Now, can you play rook c7 here? And then some discovery? It does look like it. Here we go. So where's this bishop going to go to stop any discovery with the knight? And I think the answer is nowhere. I don't think there's a square for this bishop to go to without the knight giving a check to trade itself off for the bishop. So white's probably going to play a move like d5, I would suggest. It's actually traded, so that's going to help black's cause here. No longer any issues really on g6. The d pawn's going to drop now, and that looks like all she wrote. Takes on d4 with that rook, very important, and now you can take on g4 and push the pawn up to e5, and you are a knight up, and that should be enough to win the game. A knight and a pawn up, rather. And that looks like that should be enough to secure the victory. We will just hang on here and see the conclusion of this game and probably the start of the second game before the other match gets underway. Excellent, and a victory for Tim Paulden in that first game. So he takes a 1-0 lead against Tristram with 3 games to go. Again, long way to go in this match. I expect this one to be a bit to and fro. Tristram, very, very dangerous player, and some games he can completely blow you off the board. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens here as Tim kicks off with d4. And are we going to see a London? No. We're going to see knight c3 and then bishop f4. So as not a London, but I've not seen Tim play this before. So this is going to be very interesting to see what he's got in store here. Normally in the London, of course, as we've seen numerous times on this channel with Steve Dean giving us a masterclass on it, you're going to put the pawn on c3 and develop your pieces like this. But with the knight on c3, it allows black the opportunity to put a little bit more pressure on the d4 square. Sometimes you want the knight on d2 to sort of swing round to try and control the e5 square. If you go knight d2, knight f3, knight into e5. But it's obviously a different way of playing it, and a very early h4 here, Tim showing some intent here. Possibly trying to go for the throat and try and get a knockout blow in these longer games. Very interesting to see how he goes about his business here, but he's already spending a little bit of time here. Tristram has spent no time at all in this opening 6 moves. Tim already hesitating, which suggests to me he may not have been expecting either this particular setup, or perhaps this was just a creative idea early on. I'm not sure, Jack. I'm not sure. I mean, he usually plays nonsense anyway, but he normally is a 1b3 person, which I'm assuming he's trying to avoid playing and trying to avoid any preparation for that. But yes, Tim, this I wouldn't say it's nonsense. White's play fairly natural moves, but it doesn't feel like it's particularly threatening, I would say. But I don't know it particularly well. The other match has got underway between Paul and David. We're going to keep a closer eye on that one as we see David playing with the white pieces again here, needing to not lose this one to stay in the match. We got a Staunton gambit. I said it was going to be another gambit, didn't I? And I've absolutely no idea what the theory is on this, but once again we've seen that black is a pawn up. But this pawn perhaps is is one of the doubled isolated ones. Good good space advantage in the center for now. Although is black going to be able to hold on to it? But yes, David Holmes definitely stamping his foot on the match by playing 3 gambits in a row. Incredibly brave. I'm not surprised in the slightest that we've seen all these gambits. We've seen this from him in the in the graded section in the last 2 Grand Prix, and I know every other game we've played, we've seen from him as well. So going to be interesting to see what David's follow-up is to this. Just trying to think what a good plan here is for White. Obviously, White has given up this pawn. How are you going to get this back, or do you even want it back straight away? Castle's queenside, you can play bishop takes h2 here, and that's going to be fatal. Bishop takes h2, king takes h2. If you imagine the king on the h2 square, you can then play knight to g4 check, forking the king and the bishop. But more importantly, once the king moves and you take on e3, you then fork the queen and the rook there. So that if Paul is able to find this one, that could seal the match there and then. We will have to see whether Black finds this tactic here. I'm definitely aided by the fact I've got an evaluation bar on the left-hand side. But I don't think this is too tricky of a tactic for Paul to find here. A pretty standard sort of Greek gift type sacrifice, albeit without a sort of mating attack on the king side, just winning material. But he's castled. He's missed it. He hasn't spotted it. Well, that is a slight surprise to me, I must admit. I mean, I still prefer Black's position. I think it's fair to say. But yeah, I'm with you, John. Um, I'd expect Paul to find that sort of tactic. Um, yeah, that does surprise me slightly, but he's castled anyway, so we still have a game on here, and it's entirely possible that David hasn't spotted it either and plays a move that still allows it. Um, although it's not quite as good because once the knight takes on e3, you can then take on f8 with check. So yeah, it looks like that moment has passed. I mean, it feels kind of natural to play a move like queen d2 anyway, although this queen may want to try and go on a different square, maybe to e1 and out onto the king side. But he's decided to move the bishop to g5 and put some pressure. So we still have a game on here. White, of course, is still a pawn down, and it's still not immediately obvious how White's going to get that back, albeit, yeah, albeit, it's going to be longer term. Perhaps it's going to drop, but ideally you'd want to play something like knight g3 and knight takes e4, but this bishop on g3, bishop would just take on g3 straight away. Okay, well, let's yes, that's a good point, John, actually. You can still play bishop takes h2. It's clearly nowhere near as strong. So you can play bishop takes h2, which he's played in this position. I think this one's possibly a little bit more obvious, so to speak, than the slightly longer combination earlier. And if you take, then after knight g5 check, you can take on g5, and that also defends that knight. So White's decided to play king h1, and now Black is 2 pawns up. And I'm not sure I agree with this evaluation bar. I think if I turned on lines, it is suggesting that actually, no, it is suggesting it's like this because you can take on e4. Well, turns out I can get the difficult tactics, but I forgot you could take on e4. Okay, so material-wise, Black is still a pawn up. It's this isolated pawn here, though. And well, what's White got in return for it? Well, White can actually put pressure on this with a move like knight f4. You've got to watch out for this d pawn, but at some point you're going to want to try and play that. Maybe after c3 you play a move like knight f4, and this pawn's pinned, so it can't move to e5 to try and trade off there. But these exchanges on f6 seem to help Black's cause here. I'm not sure White wanted to trade these pieces. Feels like White wanted to keep a lot of the material on to try and put, pile more pressure on this e6 pawn, tie up some of Black's pieces, and then try and get an attack of his own should he be able to. A move like c3, queen b3 would have been an idea as well to continue to put pressure, which perhaps is an idea, although you've got to watch out for knight a5 if you've put your queen and bishop on b3 and c4. But with the queen on d2, connecting the rooks, yes, okay, Black is a little bit tied down, but Black is a pawn up, and it feels like whilst White has a little bit of compensation for that pawn, it's probably not enough, and Black's obviously going to start looking at ideas of rook h6 check, as has been played, king moving back to g1, and whilst it doesn't feel like there's any checkmating idea straight away, even with if you play a move like queen h4 here, the check on h2 doesn't immediately win. You'd almost need an extra rook to come across to be able to make that attack work particularly well. And now it's a question of can White get something of their own going with a move like d5, not straight away because you lose the bishop on c4. But if we look at the times here, 20 seconds for white here, minute and a half for Paul, and with only a 2-second increment, this is going to, come down to the wire, which is why I want to stick with this. We'll come back to Tim Paulden against Tristram de Pero in just a moment at the conclusion of this game. They should be taking a short break after their second game anyway, so we should have a little bit of time to catch up. And yes, black is now looking to try and, now going to be looking at potentially playing queen h2 and rook f8 check. Sorry, queen h1, king f2, and then rook f8 check to win the rook on f1. So white is now offering the trade here, although I think you could still play this. Although at the end of it, after rook f8 check, white's going to go and block that with knight f4. So it doesn't feel like there's any knockout blow, but for black. But black has the attack and the extra pawn, and a sizable time advantage. 50 seconds to 6. Definitely looks like this is going to go in the way of Paul here with the black pieces. But anything can still happen. This is blitz, and Paul is taking his time to try and calculate something to a win here. And yeah, I didn't see anything here. And now this queen's got to retreat, probably to h4. And after takes g3, which defends the knight, maybe you can go rook h2 check here, which is a problem. I was thinking maybe white could have, got some counterplay with taking on e6, but I think rook h2 was the problem. I suppose black could have dropped back to h6 as well to guard that. But yes, quite tactical, and with black playing these forcing moves, the danger with these forcing moves is that, of course, white has now used up a lot of time, and after rook e8. Black used up a lot of time and it sort of equalized, but this is looking fairly brutal now. The bishop dropping on c4, and if you take on c6, then you play bishop takes e6, and you're going to be a piece up. David has lost on time, so Paul has come through this match 2.5 points has been reached. Of course, the fourth game they will be playing out to see whether it be 2.5, 1.5, or 3.5 half. We'll probably see a From's Gambit again from David to make it 4 gambits out of 4. But for now, we'll leave them to play their fourth game. Congratulations to Paul. He'll be up against Jack Rudd in the semi-finals next Friday. But for now, we haven't seen a gambit. I'm very disappointed. For now, we'll jump back to Tim Paulden against Tristram, where not many moves have been played. So I said time was going to be a factor in this match. I'm not surprised. h4, h5, queen d2, I think is where we left this off. And then this move c5, as I say, once you put the knight on c3, you can start to put a little bit more pressure on the center. dc5, knight a6, and then the trade on a6, doubling these pawns, but giving black this open b file, and also giving black the 2 bishops is, a bit double-edged. I think it's probably good for white. Doesn't feel like black has enough for that concession, but we'll see how things go. Knight f3, the bishop is developed. Castles, rook c8, natural developing moves. The evaluation bar's moved a bit, so it's possible there was a tactic, but we can have a look at that afterwards. Rook takes c5, bishop to e5, trying to put the bishop in the middle of the board, stop any advance. Maybe even put it on d4 and just control the center. e6, rook c1, just prophylactically defending that c-pawn. Rook c8. Feels like black perhaps wants to try and just connect those rooks, although black has potentially an idea here. Queen d4, so putting pressure on this f6 knight. All these pawns on light squares is giving, these dark squares perhaps some holes. White is trying his best to try and stop that. Knight to e8, e4, and now f6. with the bishop dropping back. Well, I'm not entirely sure what's happened here. It felt like white was doing quite well, and I'm not sure I like what has happened here. This allowing of after 98 e4 feels like that's probably, you know, not the right idea, because you can play f6 and e5, and then even you're potentially going to get d4 in. However, there was a pawn under attack there, so well, this is an incredibly tactical position now. This bishop is under attack on b7. This pawn is pinned on d5. Maybe I've underestimated this. I haven't actually seen the queen takes a7 was possible. Okay, well, let's have a think about what black can do here. Maybe you can play a move like knight d6, and after knight d6 that defends b7, puts more pressure on this e pawn, but then e takes d5. This feels very good for white, actually. Maybe black can play d4 and actually say, is there a trapping of the queen if I go d4? If we take on b7, doesn't feel like it. The evaluation bar is flung, so I'm actually going to go back and have a quick check and see. Rook to f7 is the move. Let's have a quick look at this line. I don't normally have a look at this, you know, whilst playing, but whilst having a look. Live evaluation, live analysis, there we go. So apparently instead of bishop a8, we can go rook f7. After rook f7, we can take here, and then bishop h6. Wow, I mean, this, or knight to d6. So I think the idea here is that this queen's just going to get stuck somewhere. I'm not entirely sure. This feels like a very difficult line to find, if I'm honest. Obviously, there's going to be possibly some discoveries, but that doesn't feel particularly practical, so to speak, for the level we're looking at. So after bishop a8, which feels like a more natural move, taking on d5 as we expected, and knight coming to d6. The a6 pawn drops, and bishop coming to b7. The queen's going to run away. I'll turn off the engine now. We don't need that. So the queen's going to run away, probably to e2, I would say. That feels like a slightly safer square than allowing any potential pawn push with e4, not straight away, but just feels a little bit safer. And let's take stock of the position. Good to have you here, Adelana. Oh, I can't say your name. Adelantor. Thanks for enjoying the stream and tuning in. So let's take stock here. White has 7 pawns, black has 4. So white is 3 pawns up in this position. They went very, very quickly, didn't they? They disappeared very quickly. Yeah, I agree with you, Jack, that actually, I mean, the evaluation's saying +2. I mean, it's obviously it's not a particularly strong engine that chess.com run whilst these play, which is why I tend to have it off. But yeah, white with 3 pawns has not got as, you know, I was about to say it's not got to +3, but I mean it just has. But yeah, this move bishop a6 looks threatening on the queen for sure, but there's no check with the knight. There's no way to move the knight with check, and this bishop is undefended. So, you know, you can play potentially, you know, it's I'd say threat, but you could play something like knight e3, but then you would take on take the knight, but knight a3, let's say, you take on a6, and then, you know, if black takes the rook, white takes the knight back, and then black's only traded 2 minor pieces for the rook, so that doesn't feel like the right thing. And Tim notices that as well, and decides not to worry about any discovery. There isn't any threat, no matter how menacing that potentially looks, and just plays a move knight to e4. You know, if the move f5 happens, then knight to g5, and now knight takes b2. We're going to see something very similar to what I've just said, I think. Queen takes a6, and now knight takes d1. Now I think you can just play rook takes, and okay, black has won a couple of pawns. which is slightly better than the line I was giving. But we're hitting something very similar, where white has got two minor pieces. I'll highlight the two extra minor pieces. The two minor pieces for the rook. White also has an extra one pawn for that, and it's this pretty dangerous d pawn as well that is giving white a lot of space. After f5, now you can play a knight g5, a lovely square for the knight, looking to jump into e6, which would fork the queen and the rook. Looking like a really nice position, and it would mean that that Tim takes a 2-0 lead. But the time is going to be a big factor here. 3-second increment, so there should be enough time for the players to not blunder. I say that, it's pretty difficult. And that is a blunder. Why did I just say that? Queen takes a6. Well, okay, this has suddenly become very, very tricky for white. Wow. Okay, I've just jinxed Tim there. Oh dear. I must admit, I just did not expect that happening. Oh my word! And Tim has won on time. What? Okay, let's just take stock of what happened in the last minute. Okay, so I say, no blunders. It should be enough time, especially for white, is what I was going to say, to convert this. Pawn to d7, just dropping the queen on a6. Okay, white gets another queen, and then Tristram runs out of time. Let's take a quick look at this position. You may think there's a little tactic here, but there's not quite. You know, if you take here, rook takes d8, potentially looks like checkmate because the king can't get out. But of course, you can block that with bishop f8. But the fact here that that black runs out of time just as he gets the advantage in this game is absolutely tremendous. I mean, it shows that it can happen to everybody. I mean, this is the open section. Devon, I'm sure we've got quite a few players from, all levels watching this game, and it just goes to show that anyone can do it. And I will definitely be, commenting to Tim later on this evening that perhaps he was a little bit fortunate in that game to get the win, although he was ahead just before the queen blunder. They're taking a short break, so let's jump to the other game, the other match, Paul Hampton, David Holmes. Paul Hampton already through to the semi-finals, where he'll play Jack Rudd. He's got the 2.5 points, but they're fighting for pride in this fourth game, and I think we've joined it at a time where, what's the material like? It looks like it's level material. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh no, white is a pawn up. I can't count quickly. White is a pawn up, but black's rook on c6, the knight on b4 look like they're working really well together. The pawn on d4, under attack from the rook. Sorry, I'm still trying to get over what just happened in that last game. And this rook can come to c2 here. So even though black is a pawn down here, black has definitely got the initiative and the activity, which is exactly what David with the black pieces will want. This pawn, of course, is protected by the queen is defended by the knight from the attack. I need a rest. Oh dear, we've still got half the other half of the Tim Forden match against Tristram, so bear with me, everyone. Knight to d5, a lovely square for the knight. Can't be attacked by any pawn, so it's a great outpost. This bishop can't attack it. It's pretty much the perfect square. Black now taking on b2, and the material is level again with this really nice knight on d5. White, though, trying to get some sort of attack going on the king's side. Oh, and another timeout there. I didn't realise the times. Another unfortunate finish to that game. David with a very decent position here, equal material, but I'd probably prefer to play with the black pieces here. This knight on d5, controlling lots of squares. The other game, it just immediately flicked to it, so that's chess.com for you sometimes. But well played to Paul Hampton, 3.5 winner against David in his match. Comprehensive victory, and as I say, he'll be up against Jack Rudd in the semi-finals. We now jump to the 5+2 games between Tristram and Tim Paulden. Tim with a 2-0 advantage somehow. And we see a repeat of the opening in the longer games. Tristram needing 2 points out of 2 to take this to tie breaks. I did say I thought this would go to tie breaks, and well, once Tim had blundered that queen in the second game, I thought he was gonna it was gonna go that way, but not this time. Not this time. And we can all breathe, I think, for a little bit. I've just had a look at the chat from a little bit earlier on. I was a bit too excited by the actual games going on, but yeah, commentator's curse. Thanks, Jelly. Yeah, you're not wrong. But yeah, I think we've got a repeat of the opening here, and I mean Tim's taken a little bit more time here, and has deviated. So in the I was wondering if he was going to do this actually. So in the last game where they played, I think it was game 1. Tim played bishop d6, offering the trade of bishops, and then Tristram played bishop g5. Here in this game, black has gone bishop e7 instead, so a slightly more restrained approach. Also, I mean, Tim's played the Scandinavian for a while. I'm not surprised he's playing this. I know Tim has played this quite a lot, and I assume he just wants to avoid any preparation against the modern. I know, having had a look at some of the games before this evening, Tristram's had quite good success against Tim's modern sometimes, sometimes completely had strong positions. So I imagine that's why Tim has switched over to the Scandinavian. I'm slightly surprised he played the Chigorin with d4 and knight c3 in with the white pieces. That's something I've not seen him play before, but it's always nice to have a opening repertoire which allows you to play multiple different openings. Certainly gives you that flexibility to be able to switch up against particular opponents, depending on the style that they might play. I certainly do it depending on what my opponent plays. I'll switch things up. I won't say how, because that would be giving away absolutely not top secret knowledge, but it's not really gaining me much of an advantage anyway, because my openings are generally rubbish. But we'll move on from that and have a look at some good openings between these two players here as I seamlessly go back into the game. So white pushing an early g4 to try and disrupt black structure, but black in remaining very resolute, very solid. And you can see how this is, fairly reminiscent of an Alekhine's defense. I appreciate some of you may not know what that is. So this is where white goes e4 and then knight f6 on move 1. And then when the pawn moves, you put the knight in on d5, and it gets chased around the board, but it's sort of forcing white to, or provoking white to overextend. And you do get these similar structures with the pawns on c6 and e6. And you can see that sort of with the knight going from f6 to d5, and was probably going to go to b6, but it's been taken in this situation. And I think Tim will be relatively pleased with that, with the black pieces. This bishop should probably drop back to d3. That feels like a better square than b3. So I think this is a good move. But black has, of course, got the open c file, and well, Tim trying to, what I think he's trying to do here is, I wouldn't say a professional job, but certainly trying to get the job done in this game by exchanging the pieces and just trying to secure the half a point to get him through to the semi-finals. But here I think Tim can just play queen f6, and that pins that bishop and I think that would have got the job done. I don't think there was any way to actually save um, that bishop being lost there. So I think that's a missed opportunity there for Tim, just looking to trade the pieces. I think that's quite a common thing as well, that if you're just looking for a draw, and so you sort of got in that mindset of I'm going to exchange pieces, which isn't necessarily the best way to make a draw. You sometimes miss these tactical opportunities. But Queen B8 offering the exchange of queens. I mean, I don't think there's any way that that Tristram's going to take that. And all of a sudden here, it feels like Tristram's got somewhere. Now this G pawn's under attack. This queen is just feels like it's on the wrong square. It feels like you want it on D6 perhaps. But with this pawn on G7 and under attack, you don't really want to castle here. I don't think you can probably get away with it, but this bishop is lined up ready for it. And if you play G6, these dark squares look like they, have the potential to be weak. Not straight away, and white doesn't have a dark squared bishop to be able to attack those. But, it's going to be interesting to see how Tristram tries to deal with this. This move, Queen H6, prevents castling. Again, not sure if black wants to do that anyway. Excuse me. But now with the queen on D6, it feels like white's going to want to put the rook in the central square of E1. Perhaps you want to play to F1 and actually push that F pawn up the board. You could push it straight away as well, with the queen protecting it. And it feels like because white has stopped black castling kingside, you wanted to open up the center. And I was thinking, is Tim now going to castle queenside to try and get out of the line of these two rooks and potentially that opening up? Rook c1 here. Well, I don't think there's any prizes for guessing what Tristram's plan is here. The move c4 looks like it's coming to try and open up this rook to the king. Tim calmly stepping out of the way of that. Very typical move once you've castled queenside. And now Tristram rerouting his queen. The queen's done its job on h6 to prevent castling kingside. Now it's out of place there, so bring it back into the middle of the board to do something with it later on. And I guess this big question that comes up in this position: what's better, the bishop or the knight? And I think a lot of the game is going to come down to that. It doesn't look like there's any sort of immediate attack for either side. This knight's going to try and land on c4, and I think if black plays knight to c4, I don't think it should be taken, but it might have to be. Actually, just looking at the queen side, that knight attacking b2, the queen might have come in. So Tristram just deciding to trade it and force the rook back. But Tim only needing a draw to secure the match here. And, well, I think this is a really good position for Tim to be in to try and get that draw. Major piece end game. Tim's king relatively safe on the queen side so far. I think white's king's fairly safe as well, although that seems to open things up. I'm not sure there's... it doesn't look like there's an immediate counter punch, but if you play queen b4 here, for example, then white almost had to block with the queen, and that would have been another trade of pieces. Now this c5 move's played, and this queen's going to sit really nicely on d5. And I think, given Tristram needs to win this game, and looking at the time down to 14 seconds already, I was going to say I'd want to be preparing rook, in this position, rook b3, rook c1. Just try and get c6 in, or try and get something on the b file, maybe king a1, rook b1. Just try and do something. With the time situation as it is, needing to win, very, very tough situation to be in for white. And I think, you almost have to play, not very cautiously. You just need to go quickly, make decent moves, and try and get the game to a good position as much as you can. Feels like you want to take this with the queen, I think, here. Oh, maybe not, actually. I was thinking queen takes b7, but then when the king moves away, you've got to watch out for something like rook b1. I think we'll see this. King moves to the corner. Now you've got to watch out for rook b1, which would skewer the queen, pin the queen to the king, rather. But this is a nice move, taking on d4, attacking the queen. Queen moves with check. King can just move to the corner here. And there doesn't look like there's any danger immediately. But so black has won a couple of pawns here. But of course, you know, it's going to be down to can black keep his king safe and whether Tim can not blunder his queen again. We'll have to see whether that happens or not. But yeah, rook b1. I assume Tim's either going to play queen c7 or queen c6 here. Queen c7 offers the trade of queens. It feels like queen c6 is better because you just want to be protecting this diagonal, the only way to get at the king. And after queen c3, there we are, the trade of queens. You know, black only needs a draw here and he's a pawn up. This is an ideal position here. And now I think, well, I was going to say, you know, you can take this. I was even going to suggest just king b7 and rook c7, but stay active with your rooks if you can win a pawn. Rook endgames, you want to keep your rook active. Don't go passive. And yeah, my only worry was that the king was going to get cut off by the white rook, but it's not enough. This pawn on f4 is going to drop. Obviously, there's been a timeout here, and but that's yeah, that was a well-played game, I think, from Tim. A missed tactic early on, but a very, I will say, professional job there to get the job done there. And Tim now firing out b4 once the match is over. The orangutan Polish opening, whatever you want to call it. And yes, so we have our semi-final lineup. Tim Paulden will be up against John Underwood next Friday, second v third in the Grand Prix, and Jack Rudd will be up against Paul Hampton, first versus fourth. Going to be a really exciting semi-final. Unfortunately, it will just be me again on commentary, but that's absolutely fine. I'm sure you can all put up with me for another week. Although, John, if you're still in the chat, please make sure you beat Tim next week, so I've got a commentator with me for the final. So this is clearly just nonsense from Tim. This opening, sacrificed a pawn, has now just allowed this. Well, okay, he's at least not getting double pawns, but it's sacrificing a pawn on b4. You know, sacrificing a pawn on f4 as well. Yeah, but Tim, in the knowledge that he's won the match, well, I'm sure he doesn't mind. He's also threatening things like, you know, queen e6. Well, queen e6 here actually looks like it might be quite good. Queen e6 with the threat of playing queen f7 check and bishop e6 checkmate. Don't be surprised if Tim tries that just to see. I think queen e6, rook f8 is probably fine. Or even queen d7's probably fine after queen e6. But Tim just going to play some moves, I think. I'm sure he'll want to try and get a 4-0 win, for sure. But, yeah, we'll see how this one goes. Yeah, we could see if Keith's around. That is a possibility. I'll have a chat with Tim and see what we can do for next week. You'll definitely have me, I'm afraid, though. So that there's no getting away from that. Sorry about that. No tie-breaks still. No tie-breaks still, though. Maybe we'll get one in the semi-finals. I was hoping for a 2-2 draw this evening, but maybe next week. Maybe next week. So yeah, if you're not already following the channel, if you're watching the stream, feel free to follow, so you can get notified when we go live next Friday, same time, 7:30 GMT, which is the 12th of March. And then on 19th of March, we'll have the finals as well. You're too lovely. So Tristram a little bit I wouldn't say puzzle, but trying to come up with a good plan here. And I can understand why, because you want to almost play Queen D7 here to try and just get castled queenside. But actually, Queen D7, White can play Bishop E6, so block that line between the two queens, and actually it makes it quite difficult to come up with a plan for Black. Maybe I've not given Tim enough credit here with the white pieces. I was just surprised he was playing so quickly, and maybe it was just preparation that he'd come up with, or something else, who knows. But I think it's fair to say that I think Jack would have been pretty pleased to have faced 1b4. Okay, c6. This king looks like it's in a lot of trouble. Also feels like these pieces on the queen side are in a little bit of a tangle as well. It just feels like Black's structure has just become completely, I don't know, it's sort of, there's no coordination between the pieces really. Like this knight is blocked out between the two pawns. And this bishop's gonna take a while to get connected to anything. It's yeah, very tricky, and I'm not entirely sure where Black's gone wrong here. Like in this position, just heading back, knight g7 is the move that slightly stood out to me as potentially incorrect, and the computer's saying king f8, which doesn't make huge amounts of sense to me, but there we are. And if king f8 is the only move to actually gain an advantage, well, then fine. That probably means that white is doing fairly well practically. King h1 and then queen to b6. And now knight to c3. So white finishing off development here, probably going to put the rook on b1 to put pressure on the b file. This king's still stuck in the middle. This bishop on e6 is doing a wonderful job stopping the black king from castling to safety, well, relative safety, on either side. And so it's stuck in the middle, and it feels like white's just going to have to try and find the right way to try and break that open. King d8, looking to try and almost manually castle, manually move the king over to the queen side and castle it, with not in one move. As I say, rook b1, looking to put some pressure on the b file, so potentially looking at a move like bishop a3. This bishop is nicely pinned, but a move like c5 would be played to defend the bishop for now. But yeah, it looks like the b file is going to be a way forwards, and also this light square control between the two the pieces, the two white pieces there look very, very strong. Excuse me. Also trying to see if there's any sort of tactics here. If you play a move bishop a3 c5, if you imagine this pawn's moved to c5, now suddenly this d5 square is really weak because no pawns can attack it. So you can look to play a move like knight d5 check, although it'll just be taken for the moment. That definitely feels like a reasonable way to play the position. a3 instead, though, to push the bishop back. And that's a good point. If bishop c5, if this bishop moves away, this queen has to move to a6, which does not feel like a very nice square to put your queen on. It feels very much like the queen is running out of squares. I don't think there's a way of trapping it straight away. I don't think I'm missing anything. Of course, you can take on c3 as well, which gives you another square to put your the queen on c5. But now this rook coming forwards, and you've got pressure on this knight as well. Yes, tricky. Very tricky position. It's really interesting, actually, that the evaluation bar is so high, because I don't see an immediate sucker punch in this position. After takes, okay. Well, if you take the e pawn, you can play rook takes f6, and if you take with the f pawn, then you can go rook f7 and attack from that side as well. Definitely feels like it's still obviously a very good position for white to be in, but it does surprise me how good it is. But I'm sure if we tried to go down some lines, I see. So you can go rook f7 here, and however you defend, you can go bishop d7 here. You can go bishop d7. You know, it's defended by the queen, and there's no way to keep guarding the knight. You can play the other rook to f8, but this bishop can then take on e8, which then defends f7. This move also works. Queen h4 puts another attacker on e7, and if you go king d8, well, the knight is still pinned. Yeah, yeah. Tim playing like Jack rather than me. Queen h4, a nice move, and just pile on the pinned piece. And again, it's not going to get out of being pinned if you add the other defender to it. Bishop takes a5 check. Ah, yes, very nice. Yes, and okay, after rook f8, now you can take on e7, and that knight is going to fall. Or you can play a much better move and take on f8, then take on e7 and win the rook as well. And that's all she wrote. Well, that was a convincing result for Tim there. 4-0 against Tristram. Fantastic result there for Tim. Although, you know, slightly fortunate, one could say, after blundering a queen in game 2 and then winning on time, but we won't go there. And that wraps it up. So Tim Porden wins against Tristram 4-0. Paul Hampton beats David Holmes 3.5 half. And that means that we'll be moving on to the semi-finals next Friday. So 9 days time from now, 7:30 GMT, where we'll see Jack Rudd against Paul Hampton and Tim Porden against John Underwood in the open semi-finals. And then in the graded section, I'm going to have to use my memory here because I can't remember off the top of my head. We've got Steve Dean, Ian Simpson, and 2 other players. Unfortunately, I can't remember who it is, so I'm just going to have to look. I'm afraid. Don't mind me. I'm very prepared, honest. I was doing really well right up until the end. Everything prepared, and then there. So we've got. Oh, yes, of course. Sorry about that. So we've got in the quarterfinal, the semi-finals of the graded section, we've got Charlie Keane against John Morrison and Steve Dean against Ian Simpson. Sorry, Charlie. You've been in the chat the whole time, but yes, apologies for forgetting that you're in the other semi-finals. It's been a long evening. So yes, 4 matches. Really looking forward to them next Friday. I hope you can join me then if you've obviously not qualified for the semi-finals. And yeah, have a good rest of the evening and a good rest of the week. And we'll see you all on Friday for the Friday Night Blitz at the Devon Club. And next Friday for the semi-finals. Goodbye for now.